Hi, I'm Sharon, 28 years old, and I used to think the worst thing about family dinners was my mom's overcooked pot roast. I was wrong. The worst part was sitting there watching her tear me apart in front of everyone who mattered, while I smiled and nodded like a good daughter should. Living back home after college, working as an elementary school teacher, I thought I was finally becoming the person I wanted to be. But every family gathering, every church event, every simple trip to the grocery store became another opportunity for my mother to remind me and everyone else of my failures. Before I dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and let me know your city or country. Also, if family drama sounds familiar to you, give this video a like and hit that subscribe button for more real-life stories. Trust me, this one gets intense, and you won't want to miss what happened when I finally found my voice. Growing up, I thought every kid experienced what I did. The sharp criticism in public places, the way my mother would discuss my shortcomings with neighbors, while I stood right there, the constant feeling of never being quite good enough for her standards. It started early. I remember being 7 years old at a parent-teacher conference watching my mom shake her head at Mrs. Williams while talking about my messy handwriting. "She's just so careless," Mom said, as if I couldn't hear every word. "I don't know where she gets it from." Church was another stage for her performances. Every Sunday after service during coffee hour in the fellowship hall, she'd find someone to tell about my latest disappointment. When I was 12 and forgot to practice piano before my recital, she spent 20 minutes explaining to the pastor's wife how I never followed through on anything. When I was 16 and got a B+ in chemistry instead of an A, she told 3 different church ladies about my lack of discipline while I stood beside her holding her purse and trying to disappear. The pattern continued through high school. Every achievement came with a qualification, every success was measured against what she thought I should have done instead. When I got accepted to the state university with a partial scholarship, her first comment wasn't congratulations. It was disappointment that I hadn't tried harder for the more prestigious schools. When I graduated with honors in education, she wondered aloud to relatives why I'd chosen such a limiting career. College gave me 4 blissful years of distance. Living in the dorms, then sharing an apartment with roommates, I discovered what it felt like to exist without constant judgment. My friends thought I was funny. Professors respected my work. I dated guys who actually liked spending time with me. For the first time in my life, I felt normal. But student loans and the economic reality of starting a teaching career brought me back home at 25. The plan was temporary, just until I could save enough for my own place. 3 years later, I was still there, still 28, still listening to my mother explain to anyone who would listen why I wasn't living up to my potential. The grocery store incident last month was typical. We ran into Mrs. Patterson from down the street while shopping for ingredients for Dad's birthday dinner. Within 5 minutes, Mom had managed to work in commentary about my unfortunate choice to wear jeans and a sweater instead of something more professional-looking, my failure to find a husband by my age, and her concern that I was wasting my education on elementary school students instead of pursuing something more ambitious. Mrs. Patterson stood there with her cart full of frozen dinners, nodding politely while shooting me sympathetic glances. I wanted to explain that I loved my job, that I'd won Teacher of the Month twice this year, that the jeans were new and I thought I looked nice. Instead, I stood there examining the nutritional information on a box of crackers, pretending I couldn't hear my mother's voice getting louder as she warmed to her favorite subject. Walking to the car afterward, something inside me shifted slightly. For just a moment, I thought about saying something, about asking her why she felt the need to share my personal business with neighbors. But the moment passed and I climbed into the passenger seat in silence, just like always. Dad never said anything during these episodes. He developed an impressive ability to suddenly need something from another aisle whenever Mom started in on me in public. At home, he'd disappear into his workshop or find urgent projects in the yard. I used to think he just didn't notice, but I was beginning to suspect he simply didn't know how to handle her any more than I did. My job at Lincoln Elementary became my sanctuary. Walking through those doors every morning felt like stepping into a completely different version of myself. Here I was, Miss Sharon, the teacher who made math fun with games and songs, who stayed after school to help struggling readers, who decorated her classroom with student artwork and motivational posters that actually motivated me too. The contrast was stark. At school, I was confident, creative, and respected. Parents thanked me at conferences for their children's progress. My principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, had become both a mentor and friend, always encouraging me to take on leadership roles and pursue additional training. Last year, she'd nominated me for the district's Innovative Teaching Award, which I'd actually won. But the person who walked through the door at home each evening felt like a completely different human being. The confident teacher would somehow shrink back into the uncertain daughter who couldn't seem to do anything right. It was like living a double life, except one version of me was thriving while the other was slowly suffocating. My students adored me. 8-year-old Marcus, who'd struggled with reading at the beginning of the year, was now devouring chapter books and proudly showing me his progress every day. Sarah, whose parents were going through a difficult divorce, had found comfort in our classroom's calm environment and my patient listening during lunch breaks. When little David had a meltdown about his multiplication tables, I sat with him on the reading carpet and worked through his frustration until he felt confident again. These kids saw me as someone worth trusting, someone who believed in them and helped them believe in themselves. Their parents wrote thank you notes and brought gifts during Teacher Appreciation Week. The principal included my classroom in tours for visiting educators. My teaching methods were being used as examples for new teachers in the district. Yet every evening I'd drive home and transform back into the disappointment daughter. The irony wasn't lost on me that other people's parents treated me with more respect and appreciation than my own mother ever had. Mrs. Garcia had actually hugged me at the last parent conference, telling me I was exactly the kind of teacher she'd hoped her son would have. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson had requested me specifically for their younger daughter, after seeing how much their older child had grown in my class. But when I'd try to share these victories at home, Mom would find ways to diminish them. "It's basically babysitting," she'd say when I mentioned the teaching award. "Anyone can read stories to children." When I told her about the principal's praise for my innovative lesson plans, she'd respond with something like, "Too bad teachers don't make real money. You could have been doing something important by now." The disconnect was beginning to eat at me. How could I be so valued and appreciated by colleagues, parents, and students, yet feel so worthless under my own mother's critical gaze? I started having conversations with Mrs. Rodriguez about this during our planning periods. She'd listen with growing concern as I described the family dynamics at home. "Sharon," she said one afternoon as we graded papers together, "what you're describing doesn't sound normal or healthy. You're an incredible teacher and a wonderful person. If someone in your life is consistently making you feel otherwise, that's about them, not you." Her words stuck with me, but I wasn't ready to fully process what they meant. Instead, I threw myself deeper into my work, staying later to prepare lessons, volunteering for committees, anything to delay going home, and facing another evening of subtle criticism and disappointed sighs. The achievement gap between my professional and personal life kept widening. At school, I was implementing new teaching strategies and mentoring student teachers. At home, I was being lectured about my failure to find a husband and my poor choice to waste my education on such a limited career. Something had to give, but I wasn't sure what or how to make it happen. When I started dating Mark in the spring, I felt genuinely hopeful for the first time in months. Mark taught 4th grade at the school across town, and we'd met at a district training workshop on differentiated instruction. He was kind, thoughtful, and understood the challenges and rewards of teaching in ways that non-educators never seemed to grasp. Our first few dates were wonderful. Coffee after school turned into dinner conversations that lasted for hours. We talked about our students, our teaching philosophies, books we loved, and plans for summer vacation. Mark had traveled extensively before settling into teaching, and his stories about backpacking through Europe and volunteering in rural schools made me feel like my world was expanding just by listening. I was excited to introduce him to my family, convinced that having a boyfriend would finally give my mother something to approve of. Mark was educated, employed, responsible, and clearly cared about me. Surely this would be the thing that made her proud. I should have known better. The first warning sign came when I mentioned Mark's salary during a casual conversation about our dinner plans. Teachers in his district made slightly less than those in mine, and Mom immediately latched onto this detail. "So he makes even less money than you do," she said, as if this were some kind of fatal character flaw. "How do you expect to build a future with someone who can't even support himself properly?" When I explained that Mark lived comfortably within his means, and that we both loved our careers, she shook her head like I was being naive. "Love doesn't pay the bills, Sharon. You're almost 30. You need to think practically about these things." The family barbecue in June was my attempt to show her how wrong she was about Mark. I'd invited him to Dad's birthday celebration along with his parents who were visiting from Arizona. Mark's parents, Robert and Linda, were retired teachers themselves and absolutely lovely people. They brought homemade salsa and stories about their 40-year marriage, and I was certain everyone would love them. The afternoon started well enough. Mark helped Dad with the grill while I set up tables in the backyard. His parents chatted comfortably with various relatives sharing teaching stories and retirement adventures. I felt relaxed and happy watching Mark fit seamlessly into my family gathering. But as the afternoon progressed, Mom's commentary began. It started subtly as it always did. Comments about the challenges of the teaching profession, observations about how difficult it must be for young couples to make ends meet on education salaries. Mark's parents listened politely, but I could see the confusion in their eyes as Mom's tone grew increasingly pointed. The conversation that broke my heart happened while we were clearing dinner plates. Mom was talking to Linda about Mark and me, apparently unaware that we were both within earshot. "I worry about Sharon's choices," she said, her voice carrying across the yard. "She's always been drawn to these idealistic pursuits instead of thinking about practical matters. Teaching is fine as a hobby, but two teachers trying to build a life together, well, that's just setting themselves up for struggle." Linda's response was gracious but strained. "We've always found teaching to be quite fulfilling," she said carefully. "Mark and Sharon both seem passionate about their work. Passion doesn't pay for houses or children." Mom continued loading the dishwasher with unnecessary force. "I keep hoping Sharon will wake up and realize she needs to aim higher. She's smart enough, but she keeps making these limiting choices." I watched Mark's expression change as he heard this. The easy comfort he'd shown all afternoon was replaced by something I couldn't quite read. His parents exchanged a look that spoke volumes about their discomfort with the situation. Later that evening, after his parents had returned to their hotel, Mark asked me quietly if I was okay. "Your mom seems to have some strong opinions about our relationship," he said, and I could hear the concern in his voice. I found myself defending her, making excuses about her wanting the best for me, explaining that she was just protective. But even as I said the words, they felt hollow. Mark listened patiently, then asked a question that stayed with me for weeks. "Sharon, do you think she's right about us?" I assured him she wasn't, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Over the following weeks, I noticed changes in our relationship. Mark seemed more cautious around me, less spontaneous with his affection. When I invited him to another family event, he politely declined, citing other commitments. Mom's reaction to these changes was predictable. She began pointing out Mark's distance as evidence that he wasn't serious about our relationship. "If he really cared about you," she'd say, "he'd make more effort to be part of this family." The irony of this statement was lost on her completely. My friend Lisa witnessed one of these conversations during a visit and was visibly shocked. After Mom left the room, Lisa turned to me with wide eyes. "Sharon, this isn't normal," she said quietly. "The way she talks about you, about your choices, about Mark, it's like she's actively trying to undermine your happiness." I'd never heard anyone put it so bluntly before, and the words hit me like a physical blow. But they also felt true in a way that scared me. Thanksgiving dinner became the breaking point I didn't see coming. Uncle Tom and Aunt Patricia were visiting with their family, including my cousin Jessica, who'd recently gotten engaged to a pediatric surgeon. The comparison was inevitable, and I dreaded it all week. The day started early with Mom's familiar rhythm of criticism disguised as helpful suggestions. My contribution to dinner was homemade dinner rolls, something I'd been perfecting for months and was genuinely proud of. "They're a little dense," she announced to the kitchen as she examined them. "Next time try less whole wheat flour. People expect traditional rolls for holidays." My appearance received similar treatment. I'd bought a new dress specifically for the occasion, a deep green that I thought looked sophisticated and festive. "That color washes you out," she said as we were setting the table. "And the style is too young for someone your age. You need to dress more maturely if you want people to take you seriously." By the time our relatives arrived, my confidence was already shaken. Jessica looked radiant and happy, showing off her engagement ring and sharing stories about wedding planning. I was genuinely happy for her, but I could feel Mom's eyes on me during every conversation, measuring my life against my cousin's obvious success. Dinner conversation flowed naturally until Mom began steering it toward comparisons. "Jessica's fiancé is doing his residency at Children's Hospital," she announced proudly as if she had something to do with his achievements. "Such an important career. He'll be able to provide so well for their future." Jessica looked uncomfortable with the attention, but Mom was just getting started. "It's wonderful to see young people making smart choices about their futures," she continued, her eyes finding mine across the table. "Some people understand the importance of planning ahead." Uncle Tom tried to change the subject by asking about my teaching, but Mom intercepted that conversation too. "Sharon's still figuring things out," she said with a sigh that suggested deep disappointment. 28 and still living at home, dating a teacher who can barely support himself. I keep hoping she'll realize she needs to aim higher." The table fell silent. Aunt Patricia stared at her plate, clearly uncomfortable. Dad continued eating as if nothing had happened. Jessica shot me a sympathetic look that somehow made everything worse. "Mom," I said quietly, hoping to stop this before it escalated further. But she wasn't finished. "I mean, look at Jessica. Same age, engaged to a doctor, planning a beautiful future. Sharon could have had similar opportunities if she'd made better choices. But instead, she's playing with children all day and dating someone with no ambition." Uncle Tom cleared his throat. "Teaching is a noble profession," he said diplomatically. "Of course it is," Mom replied, waving her hand dismissively. "But let's be realistic about the limitations. 2 teachers together, that's a recipe for financial struggle. I raised Sharon to think bigger than that." I excused myself to the bathroom, where I sat on the edge of the tub and cried silently. The humiliation was overwhelming, but worse was the growing realization that this wasn't normal family dynamics. Normal mothers didn't systematically tear down their children in front of relatives. Normal families didn't sit in uncomfortable silence while one person was being verbally dismantled. When I returned to the table, the conversation had moved to safer topics, but the damage was done. Jessica pulled me aside later as people were leaving. "I'm so sorry about dinner," she whispered. "That wasn't fair to you at all. For what it's worth, I think you're amazing, and teaching is incredibly important work." Her kindness meant everything, but it also confirmed what I was beginning to understand. Even our extended family could see that something was wrong with how my mother treated me. The week after Thanksgiving, Mark asked if we could talk. We met at a coffee shop near his school, and I knew from his expression that the conversation wasn't going to go well. He was gentle but direct. "Sharon, I care about you deeply, but I can't continue in a relationship where I'm constantly being criticized and undermined by your family." I tried to protest to assure him that my mother's opinions didn't matter, but he stopped me. "It's not just about me," he said. "It's about watching someone I care about being treated so poorly and not knowing how to help. You deserve so much better than what you're accepting." After he left, I sat in my car in the parking lot for an hour, finally facing the truth I'd been avoiding. This wasn't about Mark not being strong enough to handle my family. This was about me not being strong enough to protect the people I cared about from my mother's toxicity. That evening, Mom's reaction to news of the breakup was predictably vindicated. "I told you he wasn't right for you," she said with satisfaction. "If he really cared, he would have made more effort. You're better off without someone so uncommitted." The rage that had been building inside me for months suddenly felt like it might explode. But I still wasn't ready to unleash it. Instead, I started researching apartments online and calculating how much money I'd need to move out. Something had to change, and if I couldn't change her, I'd have to change my situation. Sunday morning at First Presbyterian Church had always been my mother's favorite stage for public performance. She dressed carefully for these occasions, choosing outfits that projected the right image of respectability and success. I'd grown up understanding that church wasn't just about worship for her. It was about being seen by the right people and maintaining our family's reputation in the community. That particular Sunday in December, I'd put extra effort into my appearance wearing a new navy blue dress I'd bought with my own money. It was professional but stylish, and I'd felt confident when I looked in the mirror that morning. The feeling lasted exactly until we reached the church parking lot. "That dress makes you look heavier than you are," Mom said as we walked toward the main entrance. "And the color is too dark for your complexion. You need to learn to choose more flattering styles." Her voice carried across the parking lot, and I noticed Mrs. Henderson, the pastor's wife, turning to look at us. Mrs. Henderson had always been kind to me, often commenting on my work with the children's Sunday school program. Her expression this morning showed clear discomfort at overhearing my mother's critique. Inside the sanctuary, Mom continued her commentary in hushed tones during the prelude music. "Sit up straighter," she whispered, "and smile. You look so serious all the time. No wonder you can't keep a boyfriend." The service itself provided a brief respite, but I dreaded the fellowship hour that followed. Coffee and cookies in Hartwell Hall meant 30 minutes of social interaction, where my mother would have multiple opportunities to discuss my shortcomings with anyone willing to listen. I wasn't wrong to worry. Within 10 minutes of entering the fellowship hall, she'd cornered Mrs. Henderson and 2 other prominent church ladies near the coffee station. I stood nearby holding a cup of weak church coffee and a store-bought cookie, listening to her launch into her familiar routine. "I just don't know what to do about Sharon," she said, her voice pitched at the perfect level to seem confidential while ensuring I could hear every word. 28 years old, and still making such poor choices. The teaching thing is fine for now, but she needs to think about her future. Mrs. Henderson's expression grew increasingly uncomfortable. "Sharon's work with our children's program has been wonderful," she said diplomatically. "The kids adore her." "Oh, she's good with children," Mom replied, waving her hand as if this were somehow damning. "But that's not a real career for an adult woman. She should be thinking about marriage, about finding someone who can provide properly for a family." Instead, she was dating that other teacher until recently. I told her it wouldn't work out. Mrs. Patterson from our neighborhood had joined the conversation along with another woman I recognized but didn't know well. Mom seemed energized by her growing audience. "The problem is, she has no ambition." She continued, really warming to her theme now. She could have done anything with her education, but she chose the easy path. Teaching, living at home, dating men with no prospects. She embarrasses me in front of others. The words hit me like a physical blow. After 28 years of this treatment, after months of growing awareness about how wrong this was after losing Mark, because I couldn't protect him from this toxicity, something inside me finally snapped. My hands started shaking. My heart began racing. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, and I could either step back into familiar territory or jump into something completely unknown. The fellowship hall seemed to slow down around me. I could see Mrs. Henderson's face, kind and concerned. I could see the other women's expressions ranging from discomfort to curiosity, I could see my mother's satisfied expression as she discussed my failures with her captive audience, and for the first time in my life I found my voice. "Then stop introducing me as your daughter." The words came out clear and strong, cutting through the ambient conversation like a blade. The immediate area around the coffee station fell silent. Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened. Mrs. Patterson actually gasped. The woman I didn't know well took a step backward. My mother's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, shock, and then something approaching rage. But for the first time, I didn't care about her reaction. I felt like I was breathing properly for the first time in years. "Excuse me," Mom said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "You heard me?" I said, my voice steadier than I'd ever heard it. "If I embarrass you so much, stop claiming me as family. Stop introducing me to people just so you can tear me down in front of them. I'm done being your showcase of disappointment." The silence in our corner of the room was deafening. I could see other conversations stopping as people turned to see what was happening. Dad appeared at my elbow, his coffee cup shaking in his hand. "Sharon," he said quietly, but I could hear something in his voice I'd never heard before. It might have been pride. I set my coffee cup down on the nearest table and walked toward the exit. Behind me I could hear the murmur of voices starting up again, the sound of damage control beginning. But I didn't look back. In the parking lot, sitting in my car with the engine running, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: freedom. The car ride home was the longest 15 minutes of my life. Mom sat in the passenger seat vibrating with barely controlled rage while Dad drove in complete silence. The tension was so thick I could barely breathe, but underneath my fear was something new and powerful: the knowledge that I had finally stood up for myself. "How dare you?" Mom began as soon as we were through the front door. "How dare you embarrass me like that in front of the entire church? Mrs. Henderson is going to tell everyone about your outburst. Do you realize what you've done to our reputation?" For once, Dad didn't disappear into his workshop. Instead, he stood in the living room doorway, watching as Mom paced back and forth, building momentum for what I knew would be a lengthy tirade about my disrespect and ingratitude. "You ungrateful, selfish girl," she continued. "After everything I've done for you, after letting you live in this house rent-free for 3 years, this is how you repay me, by humiliating me in public." Something about the phrase, "letting you live in this house," triggered a response I didn't expect. Instead of shrinking back or apologizing, I felt my newfound strength growing stronger. "Everything you've done for me," I repeated, my voice calm but firm. "You mean like telling Mrs. Patterson at the grocery store that my clothes are inappropriate? Like explaining to Mark's parents that we're doomed to failure because we're both teachers? Like announcing to Uncle Tom's family that I'm a disappointment compared to Jessica?" "I was being honest," she snapped. "Someone needs to help you see reality." "No," I said, surprised by how steady my voice remained. "You were being cruel. There's a difference between helpful honesty and public humiliation." Dad cleared his throat from the doorway. "Sharon's right, Margaret." We both turned to stare at him. In 30 years of marriage, I'd never heard my father directly contradict my mother about anything significant. "What did you say?" Mom asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "I said Sharon's right," Dad repeated, stepping further into the room. "I've watched you tear her down in public for years, and I should have said something long ago. What happened at church today needed to happen." "You're taking her side," Mom accused, as if this were the ultimate betrayal. "I'm taking the side of basic human decency," Dad replied. "Sharon is a wonderful person with a job she loves and students who adore her. She doesn't deserve to be criticized constantly, especially not in front of other people." This was clearly not the backup Mom had expected. She turned back to me with renewed fury. "If you think you can just walk all over me in my own house, you're mistaken. Maybe it's time for you to find somewhere else to live." The threat that would have terrified me even a week ago now felt like an opportunity. "Actually," I said, reaching into my purse for the folder I'd been carrying around for days, "I've been looking at apartments. Here's what I need from you. Either we go to family counseling together and you learn to treat me with basic respect, or I move out by the end of the month. I pulled out the apartment listings I'd printed, the budget I'd calculated, and the timeline I'd worked out. Mom's eyes widened as she realized this wasn't an empty threat or emotional outburst. This was a plan. "You can't be serious," she said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. "I'm completely serious," I replied. "I won't live like this anymore. I won't be your emotional punching bag, and I won't let you humiliate me in front of other people. Those are my terms." What happened next was something I'd never witnessed in my entire life. My mother broke down. Not the angry tears of frustration I'd seen before, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere she usually kept locked away. "I don't know how to do this," she cried, collapsing into Dad's chair. "I don't know how to be different. My mother did the same thing to me, and her mother did it to her. I thought I was helping you be better." Dad moved to her side, and I saw him really look at her, perhaps for the first time in years. "Margaret," he said gently, "what your mother did to you was wrong. What you're doing to Sharon is wrong, but it's not too late to change." The conversation that followed was unlike anything our family had ever experienced. Mom talked about her own childhood, about being constantly criticized, and compared to her siblings, about never feeling good enough for her own mother's approval. She talked about her fear that I would leave her the way her brother and sister had left their mother, cutting off contact, rather than enduring the constant judgment. "I thought if I kept pointing out problems, you'd fix them and be happier," she said through tears. "I thought I was protecting you from making mistakes." "But you weren't protecting me," I said, sitting down across from her. "You were destroying my confidence and my relationships. You pushed Mark away. You made me ashamed of my career. You made me feel like I was never good enough for anything." Dad shared his own perspective, then talking about years of watching our family dynamic and not knowing how to intervene. "I knew it was wrong," he admitted, "but I didn't know how to help either of you. I thought if I stayed out of it, things would work themselves out." "Well, they didn't," I said. "They got worse, and now we have to decide if we want to fix this or if I need to build my life somewhere else." The ultimatum hung in the air like a challenge. Mom looked at the apartment listings spread across the coffee table, then at Dad, then at me. "What would counseling involve?" she asked quietly. "Learning new ways to communicate," I said. "Learning about boundaries and respect. Learning how to have a relationship that doesn't involve constant criticism." She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she nodded. "I'll try," she said. "I don't want to lose you. I just don't know how to be different." "Then we'll learn together," I said. The phone started ringing almost immediately after we'd finished talking. Word of the church incident was spreading and people wanted details. Mrs. Henderson called first, and I was surprised when she asked to speak to me directly. "Sharon," she said, "I wanted you to know that several of us were proud of you today. What you did took courage, and it was long overdue." Other calls followed. Some were supportive. Others were critical of my disrespect toward my mother. But for the first time, I didn't care about managing other people's opinions. I'd found my voice, and I wasn't going to lose it again. 6 months later, I'm sitting in Dr. Martinez's office with my parents for our weekly family therapy session. The woman who broke down in our living room that December afternoon is still there, but she's learning to build something new alongside the patterns she's trying to break. The work hasn't been easy. The first few sessions were brutal, with Mom alternating between defensive anger and guilty tears, as Dr. Martinez helped her recognize the impact of her behavior. There were moments when I thought she might quit, when the discomfort of examining her patterns became too much. But something shifted during our 4th session when Dr. Martinez asked her a simple question. "Margaret, how did it feel when your own mother criticized you in front of others?" The pain in Mom's face was immediate and raw. "Horrible," she whispered, "like I could never do anything right. Like I was disappointing her just by existing." "And how do you think Sharon felt when you did the same thing to her?" The connection was impossible to deny. Mom looked at me across the small office space, and for the first time, I saw real understanding in her eyes. My own therapy sessions, separate from the family counseling, have been equally transformative. Dr. Williams has helped me understand the impact of growing up with constant criticism, the way it shaped my self-esteem and my relationships. We've worked on building boundaries, on recognizing my own worth, on trusting my instincts about what I deserve from the people in my life. The changes at home have been gradual but significant. Mom still catches herself before making critical comments, and she's learning to apologize when she slips back into old patterns. Last week, when I told her about receiving recognition for my work with struggling readers, her first response was, "That's wonderful, honey. I'm proud of you." The words felt foreign coming from her, but genuine. Dad has become more active in our family dynamic too. Marriage counseling has helped him find his voice in supporting me and in helping Mom change her patterns. He's learning to speak up when he sees problems instead of disappearing into his workshop. My professional life has continued to flourish. Mrs. Rodriguez approached me last month about applying for an assistant principal position that's opening up next year. The idea of taking on leadership responsibilities feels exciting instead of terrifying now that I'm not going home every day to have my confidence systematically destroyed. I've started dating again, too. David is a librarian. I met at a community education event, and he's patient and kind in ways that feel completely different from my relationship with Mark. When I told him about my family situation and the work we're doing in therapy, his response was supportive rather than scared. "Everyone deserves to be treated with respect," he said simply. "I'm glad you're creating that for yourself." The real test came last month when I brought David to Sunday dinner for the first time. I watched Mom carefully ready to intervene if she started her old patterns of criticism and comparison. Instead, she asked him thoughtful questions about his work, complimented the wine he'd brought, and actually bragged to my aunt on the phone later about what a lovely young man Sharon was dating. Church has become a different experience too, Mrs. Henderson has become a genuine friend, and several other church members have shared their own stories about difficult family dynamics. My moment of standing up for myself seems to have given others permission to examine their own boundaries. The most powerful change has been in how I see myself. The confident teacher who thrived at Lincoln Elementary no longer disappears when I walk through my family's front door. I know my worth now, and I protect it fiercely. When Mom occasionally slips back into critical comments, I address them immediately instead of absorbing them silently. "Mom," I'll say calmly, "that's not helpful or appropriate. Can you rephrase that in a more respectful way?" And increasingly she can. The woman who used to double down on criticism when challenged now stops, thinks, and tries again. It's not perfect, but it's progress that feels real and sustainable. Dr. Martinez says our family is doing the hard work of breaking generational patterns. Mom's mother criticized her constantly, and her grandmother had done the same to Mom's mother. The cycle felt inevitable until we chose to interrupt it with intentional change. Christmas dinner this year was a revelation. Instead of the tense gathering I'd come to expect, we had genuine conversation and laughter. Mom complimented my sweet potato casserole instead of suggesting improvements. She asked David about his family with real interest instead of probing for inadequacies. When Jessica and her fiancé visited, Mom managed to celebrate their engagement without using it as an opportunity to criticize my life choices. Dad carved the turkey while humming Christmas carols. David helped with dishes and charmed everyone with stories about the library's holiday programs. I looked around the table and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine enjoyment of my family's company. The lesson I've learned through this process is that sometimes loving someone means refusing to accept their treatment of you. For years, I thought being a good daughter meant absorbing Mom's criticism without complaint. I thought my job was to make her happy by becoming the person she wanted me to be. But real love requires mutual respect. It requires seeing each other as whole people deserving of kindness and consideration. It requires the courage to speak up when someone you care about is hurting you, even if speaking up feels dangerous. I'm not the same person who stood silently in grocery stores while her mother discussed her failures with neighbors. I'm not the same person who lost a good relationship because she couldn't protect her partner from family toxicity. I'm not the same person who measured her worth by her mother's approval. I'm Sharon, 28 years old, a teacher who makes a difference in children's lives every day, a woman learning to trust her own judgment about what she deserves. I'm someone who has learned that you can love your family while refusing to accept unacceptable behavior from them. The journey isn't over. Therapy continues. Boundaries require constant maintenance, and old patterns try to resurface during times of stress. But I know now that I have a voice, and I know how to use it. I know that my worth isn't determined by someone else's opinion of my choices, even if that someone is my mother. Most importantly, I know that speaking up for yourself isn't selfish or disrespectful. It's necessary. It's the foundation of every healthy relationship, including the one you have with yourself. Have you ever had to stand up to someone you love because they were treating you poorly? Have you struggled with family members who seem to criticize everything you do? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our experiences helps others find the courage to set their own boundaries. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding your voice and creating healthier relationships. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that they deserve to be treated with respect no matter who's doing the treating. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember that you have the right to be treated with kindness and respect by everyone in your life, including family members. Setting boundaries isn't about hurting people you love. It's about loving yourself enough to insist on being treated well. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video.